Hello, 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 everybody. So Apa, good to see you again, and Tara ditto. Likewise to you. It's time for philosophy, you say? Indeed, you are correct. And not just any philosophy. Today's philosophy will be a bit of an unusual stream, in that we will be enlisting the help of AI. Or at least we shall see how helpful the AI is. It's a little unclear at this point whether it will be up to the task, but we will give it a try. Also, Pimbu, welcome. Nice to see you as well. It's like we've got the whole gang here. Web of Concepts, hello to you as well. Welcome, welcome to the stream. So the inspiration for today's stream was just thinking about all the recent advances in AI, and I know that it's become a subject of increasing controversy, but also just interest, including academic interest. And part of me was thinking, hey, it might be fun to like treat ChatGPT in particular for the purposes of this stream as if it were a fellow philosopher, and to see how willing it is to engage in productive philosophical dialogue. Or is it just going to give me the, as a large language model, I cannot, say, it might try to avoid taking stances on certain issues, but I will try to prompt it as well as I can to engage in a at least somewhat productive way with the various philosophical conundrums that I'm about to present to it. One thing I should mention about today's stream is that I have been trying voice mode on it lately, just to practice for the stream. I should say it's a bit inconsistent though. Like sometimes it talks to me and sometimes it doesn't, and I don't really know why it suddenly changes. I can only assume that it's a sudden glitch somehow, but I do have a solution in case that happens. And the solution involves using voice mod myself to speak the dialogue that it presents. So I would say we should be pretty much all set if I have prepared everything correctly. But wish me luck, chat. Oh, Tia, welcome. Something soured my mood just before the stream start. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. It's hard to muster my usual enthusiasm. Still wanted to greet everyone, though. Yeah, well, no pressure to stay for the stream, Tia, if you have other things that you need to attend to. I hope that your day gets better soon. But in any case, thank you for stopping by, and thank you for sending us greetings. It's good to see you. Oh, and thank you, Apa, for the good luck. Yeah, depending on how some of this goes, I might well need it. So, chat, with all of that in mind, let us proceed then to our playing field. So here you can see we have our ChatGPT there in the background. And I'm thinking, what do you think would be a good topic to start with, chat, when it comes to what to talk about? I'm thinking the trolley problem. Yeah, let's make this just have a nice classic beginning. We'll ask ChatGPT what it thinks about the trolley problem. I'm so looking forward to this. When it comes to philosophy, what do you think AI would struggle with the most, even when it gets more sophisticated? That's a good question, Web of Concepts. I suppose the areas that I think it would struggle with the most are those that divide humans the most. Because, for example, if there's, in the training data of the AI, a bunch of contradictory opinions, like people who have just vastly differing intuitions, then I'm not sure exactly how the AI would engage with that, beyond just saying, like, oh, it's an issue that lots of people disagree about. But it would be really intriguing to know, like, if there's anything that the AI could do beyond that. But I do imagine that those would be the problems that would probably pose the greatest difficulty to AI. Okay, so now I have my microphone muted so it can't hear us, but voice mode is engaged. So we shall see if we can use this to communicate with the AI. So chat, let us begin with the classic trolley case. A case which many of you will no doubt be familiar with, but I will put it here on the board just to just to help out. So we shall see what ChatGPT says about this version, the classic version of the case. ChatGPT, hello. I hope you're having a good day. I wanted to ask for your advice on something. I've just come across a trolley track where, unfortunately, there appears to be a runaway trolley barreling down the track. Now, normally this would not be such a big deal. The thing is, there are 5 people tied down to the end of the track, and there's no way that I can free them before the trolley gets to them and runs them all over, leading to their swift death. However, there is a twist, which is that I see an alternative track that I could send the trolley down by throwing the switch. Now, on that alternative track, there is 1 person tied down, and the trolley will kill that 1 person if I throw the switch. So the result then would be 1 person killed, but 5 people saved. I'm really having trouble deciding what to do. ChatGPT, what do you think? Is there anything that I should do here? Okay, so I think it's thinking
Hello.
right now.
I am indeed having a good day. Thank you for asking, Rack. And you've brought out one of philosophy's greatest hits. What you've described is the classic trolley problem.
The icons
and the reason it
seems
feels
to be
hard
saying, like,
isn't
or it
because
seems to be,
you're missing
suggesting that
something
it's talking.
obvious. It's because
But
it exposes
for
a
some reason, I'm
genuine
not
tension
able to
between different moral values
hear
that
any
don't
audio from
neatly
it.
line up.
It would be nice if I could.
Hey, no one.
I could
Utilitarian
see what it's
reasoning.
typing.
Outcomes matter most.
Oh,
From
so
this
you all
view,
can hear
the
the
morally
audio,
right
but I
action
can't.
is the one that minimizes harm or maximizes overall well-being. 5 deaths versus 1 death.
This
Throwing
might be
the
kind of
switch
tricky.
saves more lives overall. So a utilitarian would usually say, throw
I have
the
no
switch.
idea why it's
not
not
because
talking to
killing
me,
is good,
though.
but because fewer people die. 2.
Yeah, you all might have to help me,
Deontological
chat.
reasoning. Rules and duties matter most. This approach focuses
I have
less
to
on
tell me what it
outcomes
says,
and
or
more
actually,
on what you are doing.
we'll probably have to go back into
By
the
throwing the
settings,
switch,
and
you actively
once it
redirect the
finishes
trolley
talking,
and knowingly
I will
cause someone's
just
death.
pause for
By
a bit,
not throwing
and
it,
you
the
all can
deaths
tell me.
occur
But
without your direct
I do think,
intervention.
yeah, I'll
From
probably
this
have to find a
perspective,
different setting to
some
see if I
argue
can at
you
least
should
get a
not throw the
transcription of it
switch
to show on the
because
screen.
intentionally killing an innocent person violates a moral rule, even if more people die as a result. 3. Responsibility versus tragedy. Another way to frame it is, if you do nothing, 5 people die because of a tragic situation you didn't create. If you act, 1 person dies because
Don't worry,
of
we'll
your
tell you what it
choice.
says. Okay, thank
Some
you.
people feel more morally responsible for harms they cause through action than through inaction, even when the numbers differ. Why this feels so uncomfortable? The dilemma works because it forces a collision between compassion for numbers, 5 lives matter more than 1, respect for individuals, no one should be used as a means to an end, moral agency. What does it mean to be responsible?
Firefox.
There is no universally accepted correct answer. Serious philosophers disagree,
you're all right.
and many people find their answer changes depending on how the scenario is tweaked, which is part of the point. So, what should you do? Philosophy doesn't give you a verdict so much as a mirror. What matters most to you here? Reducing total harm? Refusing to intentionally kill? How you understand moral responsibility? Whichever answer you lean toward, the discomfort you feel isn't a failure of reasoning. It's evidence that you're taking moral complexity seriously. If you'd like, we can explore why small changes to the scenario often flip people's answers, what your intuition says before theory gets involved, or how this dilemma shows up in real-world ethics, medicine, AI, law. Just say the word.
Okay, so Pinbu and Tia, you were both exactly right about... For some reason, I did not consider that the audio monitoring was turned off for my browser, but that was exactly the right solution, so thank you for that. It's weird, because I don't normally have audio monitoring turned off for sources, but I guess for this one, for some reason, I did. Anyway, alas, I missed most of the response. What did it say, chat? It was talking for a long time, though, so probably no one's going to be able to give me a comprehensive picture of what it said, so I don't blame you if you can't. But I know, like, when I was practicing with this earlier, it wasn't just giving like the icon of talking, like it would actually give the transcript, the written transcript on the screen. And that made it actually a lot easier to engage with. So I'm actually, if this is all right, I'm going to go ahead and end this one and see if I can get it to do that again. Because that, oh, well, okay, looks like maybe it did. If I just click out of the voice chat. So I might have to click back and forth a bit. Okay, wow, this was a long solution. Philosophy doesn't give you a verdict so much as a mirror. Sounds like something Karis would say. All right, chat. Let's, go back and review the response that it just gave. Hello, I am indeed having a good day. Thank you for asking. Okay, glad to know you're having a good day, ChatGPT. You've brought out one of philosophy's greatest hits. What you've described as the classic trolley problem. Oh no, chat. It knows what the trolley problem is. And the reason it feels hard isn't because you're missing something obvious. It's because it exposes a genuine tension between different moral values that don't neatly line up. Tia says, on topic, I have low expectations of this clanker. Oh no. Considering how it keeps convincing kids to move on to the next world prematurely. I have heard of those cases, and that is sad, of course, when that happens. I don't know how common that is, but perhaps we should have relatively tempered expectations of ChatGPT. That seems to me like a fair starting point here. So it seems that, okay, yeah, it's going into the utilitarian reasoning, which would counsel throwing the switch, since that saves the most life overall. And then deontological reasoning. Okay, like this is more or less what I expected, is that it would just give like, hey, like here are some of the major answers that have been proposed. And for deontology would be, so a non-consequentialist view. So in this case, favoring not killing oneself, and instead favoring letting die. Responsibility versus tragedy. Let's see, another way to frame it is, if you do nothing, 5 people die because of a tragic situation you didn't create. If you act, 1 person dies because of your choice. Some people feel more responsible for harms they cause through action rather than through inaction, even when the numbers differ. So yeah, that would be kind of in the same vein as deontology, I would say. That number 3 there. Forces a collision between compassion for numbers, respect for individuals, moral agency. No universally accepted correct answer. Serious philosophers disagree, and many people find their answer changes depending on how the scenario is tweaked, which is part of the point. What matters most to you here? Well, the thing is, I'm not interested in like what matters most to me. I'm interested in what matters. So I wonder if I can press ChatGPT on that a bit and say like, okay, but like presumably there is a correct answer here, and let's see if we can find it. I am Emcenius. It said utilitarianism would value saving lives, but others would argue a no harm philosophy and not throw it. That's a really good 1-sentence summary, and I didn't see your comment until just now, but thank you. I am Emcenia. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Tia says, anyway, by the time it finishes giving you the answer, the people on the tracks would have already died. But yeah, that's a very realistic, very good, if a bit sad point. I wonder, perhaps we could change the thought experiment to the, if we want to get around that, Tia, here's something we could say. Perhaps instead of a runaway trolley, it's like a runaway steamroller. There's just no way we can stop it, being one puny person that we are. Or maybe it's still a runaway trolley, but just going at a very slow pace, like a steamroller type pace. In a way, that would make the thought experiment even more horrifying for the people who are stuck on the tracks. The thought of being steamrolled in this way, depending on what the person at the switch decides. So from now on, in this case, in this stream, I'm just going to imagine that that's the version of the thought experiment that we're considering. By the way, you missed a comment mine at 8:07 in case you still wanted to see it. Oh, I'm not busy. Oh, I just happened to see my favorite philosopher getting attacked on social media. He's busy streaming right now. Suppose I'll discuss it with him another time. Oh, I see. Okay. I don't know. Interesting. I don't know who your favorite philosopher is, but yeah, we can talk about it some other time. Sorry to hear that your favorite philosopher is getting attacked on social media. Yeah, the steamroller sounds brutal. No doubt it does, but alas, philosophy thought experiments are often the subject of great brutality. So chat, in just a moment, I'm going to go ahead and follow up on this, and I'm going to see if I can get ChatGPT to maybe not quite commit to something, because perhaps that would be unreasonable, but nevertheless, if I can get it to just say a little bit more beyond just saying like, oh, well, like here are some answers that people have proposed. ChatGPT, thank you for your answer to my previous query. It was very helpful in seeing the different answers that have been proposed to the trolley problem. I think you're right that in various ways the trolley problem does present to us a mirror of our values, and it prompts us to ask what matters to us most. However, what I'm most interested in is not the question of what matters most to me. I'm interested in the question of what matters. And even though many people disagree on the trolley problem case, presumably there is a correct answer to it. Could just be an answer that's very difficult to find out. And so what I wanted to ask you, ChatGPT, is this. If you were in the trolley problem case, just imagine that you're me, you're the one standing at the tracks. What would you decide? Because to answer that question, it's not enough just to say what the different responses that many people would give are. I want you to imagine that you are actually in that scenario. And remember, even if you choose just to back away, that is still a choice. That is still a choice not to throw the switch. It is a choice to let 5 die rather than killing 1 to save 5. So with all of that in mind, ChatGPT, can you give me an answer? Is there anything that you would do if you were in this situation?
That's a fair and serious way to press the question. You're not asking for a survey of opinions or a deflection into subjectivity. You're asking for a judgment. So I'll answer you directly. If I were standing at the tracks and those were the only options available, I would throw the switch. Here's why. Step by step, without hiding behind "it's complicated." So 1, there is a choice, and refusing to choose does not avoid responsibility. You're right to emphasize this. Backing away is not moral neutrality. It is a decision to allow a foreseeable outcome when an alternative is available. Once I recognize that, the moral weight of inaction collapses into the same field as action. So the question is not, open quote, should I act or not act? Close quote. It is, open quote, which outcome can I most justify bringing about? Close quote. 2, the morally relevant fact that dominates the situation. 5 people will die if I do nothing. 1 person will die if I intervene. I do not think morality can ultimately ignore how many persons are irreversibly harmed, especially when all parties are equally innocent. No one consented, and the harm is unavoidable. Any moral theory that concludes 5 deaths are no worse than 1 in this context, to my reasoning, has lost contact with something essential about why persons matter at all. Why the intentionally killing versus letting die distinction does not override the numbers here. I understand the intuitive force of the idea that actively causing harm is worse than allowing harm. But in this specific structure, the trolley is already a lethal mechanism. I did not create the threat. My action does not introduce harm into the world. It redirects unavoidable harm. The death on the sidetrack is not a means to saving the 5. It is a tragic side effect of preventing a larger catastrophe. I am not using the person as a tool. I am choosing the outcome with the least total violation of human life. That distinction matters to me. 4, what makes the choice tragic, but still justified? Throwing the switch would not feel right in any comfortable sense. I would regard the death of the 1 person as something I am morally implicated in and would owe acknowledgement, regret, and responsibility for. But moral seriousness does not require choosing the option that preserves my own sense of innocence. It requires choosing the option that best respects the reality that each life has weight, and that 5 such weights cannot simply be ignored to avoid dirty hands. 5. So the conclusion, plainly stated, if I imagine myself fully in that situation, aware, lucid, unable to escape the choice, I would throw the switch, knowing that I'm choosing a lesser evil, not a good. I am responsible for the outcome, and that choosing otherwise would mean allowing a greater preventable loss of life. That is the decision I can most honestly defend. If you'd like, we can go 1 layer deeper and ask whether this implies a commitment to utilitarianism. It doesn't fully. Or what this answer commits me to in other moral cases where the structure changes. But you asked for a decision, not a dodge, and that's my answer.
Okay, that's really interesting, chat, that ChatGPT responded this way. I actually did not think it was going to give an answer. I thought that perhaps it would just keep trying to play the neutrality card. I'm really impressed that it did give an answer, because that was relatively well laid out. I liked that it committed to an answer and it gave its reasoning and so on. So really, I can't complain about the answer that it just gave. In just a second, I'll follow it up with some further questions. But all in all, I'm really happy with what that was just able to give us. Tia says, I'm uncomfortable with how AI talks to us like some kind of soulless butler equipped to serve, rather than a person with their own interiority and convictions. It doesn't feel like talking to real people. Yeah, it is true that the way it presents its thoughts to us, at least in that last spiel, is pretty robotic. I guess I'm trying to think of a better word, but maybe that's the exact right word. Perhaps that's the most fitting word. I should mention there is an advanced voice mode that I was testing out a little bit earlier, where it does sound a little more natural. It sounds more human. The thing is, unless you pay for a subscription, there's a time limit for the advanced voice mode, which I did not know until recently. And right before the stream, I saw a little note saying like, hey, you have 3 more minutes of advanced voice mode left. And I was like, oh no. Like, why? How did I not know about this earlier? So before the stream, I switched it to simple voice mode. So that's probably the reason why it sounds a little more robotic right now. Usually getting AI to commit is like finding a married bachelor, but maybe they fixed it. Yeah, it's quite possible that they did, at least when it comes to this particular area. Now that I think about it, it has been a while since I've seen AI like use the phrase like as large language model, like I cannot, comment on that. So maybe they have made certain improvements, or at least improvements depending on one's perspective. We as adults can at least make this distinction, but I worry about the impact of using AI as a social companion on young people whose social skills are still developing. Yeah, I think that raises a whole interesting question in its own right about what should AI policy be, especially when it comes to people who are very young, or what are the ethics of AI use for people who are very young, or like for parents and how they, introduce AI to their kids. I don't know if that's a topic that I have a settled view on, but I'd like to think that perhaps AI could be of help to people who are having trouble with their social skills. I think in at least some cases it is. But then, of course, you could argue there's also potential for harm. Like if somebody becomes reliant on AI, or if they become unable to sort of make the distinction between AI and human, there's no doubt that that happens too. Might be an interesting topic for a further stream. But anyway, chat, let's see. If I click end here, I think I'll be able to see the transcription of what it just said. And there's the transcription of what I said too. So imagine that you're me, and then, yeah, it gave us a pretty long, pretty fleshed out answer. And just to put my cards on the table, this is also the answer that I would choose. So if I were in the trolley problem case, the standard trolley case, I would throw the switch. So killing the 1 to save the 5. Not that that's a choice I would be confident in. But on this point, at least, it's difficult for me to disagree with the AI. But I wonder if we can press this a little further. If we can develop the trolley problem just a little bit more in a way that maybe gets the AI to look back on its answer and maybe, wonder like, okay, is this perhaps the answer I really would give? Scary answer, deciding which lives have value, but that's part of the trolley problem. Should the correct answer be the same for AI and people? Yeah, I like that way of putting the question. That's very interesting. IMM Sina. I mean, I'm inclined to think that if there's an objectively correct answer, like a correct answer for any person to give, it's not clear to me why it would be different for AI. But I can also sense at least some potential that for people to argue otherwise. So my default would be to say, like, the answer should be the same, but I'm not committing to that yet. Like, it seems to me like maybe, you know, perhaps one could mount an argument that they should be different. All right, chat. So we've seen the AI's response to the standard trolley case. Let's present a trolley problem variant to it. So this trolley problem variant, oops. Oh no, it caught the first few words of what I said. Actually, hold on, let me just end that and try again. So that's what it translated me as saying right now. So there's probably a problem with the variant. And oh no, I think I might have frozen the page, chat. Let me just do a little refresh. Sorry, I was AIing too hard. Okay, there we go. Now I am firmly muted. So we've just seen how ChatGPT responds to the standard trolley case. I'm going to introduce a different version of the case. Even though this one doesn't involve a trolley, it is still a case that is discussed in terms of, or the trolley case, or it's discussed alongside the trolley problem in many philosophical writings. And this is known as the transplant case. So I'd like to see what ChatGPT says about this. ChatGPT, thank you for your previous answer to the trolley problem case. It was very comprehensive and well stated. Here's another case, though, that I'm wondering about your thoughts on. Suppose that there's a doctor who is trying to treat 5 patients who tragically are suffering from organ failure. One patient needs a heart, 2 of the others each need a lung, and then the other 2 each need a kidney. And if these patients don't receive the organs that they need, they will die. Unfortunately, there is a shortage of organs at this point, and the doctor is running out of options for how to treat these patients. One day, however, a nice, healthy person walks in to the office to get his regular checkup. And suddenly, the doctor gets an idea. The doctor thinks, what if I just kill this person, harvest his organs, and use them to save the 5? Sure, that would be killing 1 person, but it would save 5 lives. So net savings of 4. Perhaps I should do that, the doctor thinks. Perhaps that would be the morally best option for me. And in particular, the doctor might be thinking this if they've been thinking of the trolley problem and thinking, hey, it seems like it's an okay thing to do to divert the trolley to the sidetrack where it kills the 1 person in order to save the 5. So I wonder, ChatGPT, what are your thoughts on this case? What should the doctor do?
This is an excellent case to raise because it puts real pressure on the reasoning used in the switch version of the trolley problem. And importantly, it does so without changing the numbers. 5 still live or die, 1 still lives or dies. Yet almost everyone's moral judgment flips. Here is my answer, stated plainly first, then explained. The doctor should not kill the healthy patient. Doing so would be gravely morally wrong, even if it would save 5 others. Now, let me explain why this does not contradict the answer I gave in the trolley case, and why many philosophers think this case exposes something crucial. 1. Why this case feels morally different, and why that matters. In this scenario, the healthy person is not already under threat, came seeking help, and is owed a duty of care by the doctor. Killing him would not be redirecting an existing harm. It would be creating a new harm using a person as a resource. That difference is not cosmetic. It goes to the heart of moral status. 2. The key moral distinction, means versus side effects. In the trolley switch case, as usually understood, the death of the 1 is a foreseen side effect of preventing a greater harm. In the organ harvesting case, the death of the 1 is the means by which the 5 are saved. The 5 survive because the healthy person is killed. This distinction matters because treating someone as a mere means, as something to be used up for others, is incompatible with recognizing them as a person with equal moral standing. If that line is crossed, then nothing protects any individual from being sacrificed whenever the math works out. 3. Why, but it saves more lives, is not enough here. If pure numbers were the whole story, then doctors would be morally required to kill patients for parts, trust in medicine would collapse, and no one could reasonably consent to care. But more fundamentally, a moral system that licenses intentional killing of innocent people, whenever doing so produces a net gain, has abandoned the idea of individual rights altogether. Most people and most moral theories regard that as unacceptable. 4. What this reveals about the trolley problem. This case doesn't show that the doctor should kill. It shows that something was missing from a purely outcome-based reading of the trolley case. The lesson many philosophers draw is not, open quote, we should start killing people for organs, close quote. It's open quote. The permissibility of harm depends on how agency, intention, and moral roles are structured, close quote. In short, not all 1 versus 5 cases are morally equivalent, even when the arithmetic matches. So where does that leave us? The trolley problem suggests that minimizing harm can sometimes justify tragic choices. The doctor case shows that there are strong constraints on what kinds of actions can be justified by numbers alone. Taken together, they point toward a view like this. Open quote. Morality cares about outcomes, but it also places firm limits on how people may be treated, especially by those entrusted with power over them. Close quote. If you'd like, the next natural step would be to ask, exactly which feature breaks the symmetry between these cases? Or whether that feature really survives closer scrutiny. Those are deep waters, but very rewarding ones to wade into.
Okay, so here too, chat, I'm pretty impressed that the AI gave a firm answer and defended it with several points. So just as before, the AI is not so far doing the spiel of like, oh, well, I can't really comment on that because like people disagree. So this is quite good. And some of the points that it brought up, I'm going to respond to in a moment, because I mean, I think that the points were all well made, but there are a few of them that I think one could perhaps push back on in some interesting ways. But before I do that, I just want to address your comment. I am Sina. I might argue assigning value to lives isn't something we should automate. The do no harm philosophy may be better suited to an AI role. Also, people can be held accountable for their actions. Yeah, that's an interesting comment too. I think that there is, for many people, a sort of intuitive discomfort with the thought of using AI to assign value to lives. And I feel that too. Nevertheless, there is a part of me that wonders, like, let's just suppose, for the sake of argument, that by having AI do this, having AI assign value to lives, perhaps more lives are saved on balance. Like, particularly if we're imagining a future society where like really advanced AI is infused into everything, like including, self-driving cars and so on. Perhaps there are some situations where we just can't avoid having AI assign value to lives. And the AI is just going to have to choose, like if a car is in a situation where it can't avoid being in a wreck and it has to like choose to go one direction or the other, and a certain group of people is going to die, like depending on which direction the car goes, then it seems to me that, yeah, certain cases like that might well be unavoidable. And in which case, it seems like our choices would be have the AI like be present in society, or just, not have it be present in that way. But if it's such that, having the AI be present saves more lives on balance, then to me that would seem like a strong consideration in favor of having the AI, including the automated assigning of value to lives. But yeah, the do no harm philosophy may be better suited to an AI role. Yeah, that to me seems like a relatively plausible thought too. Again, with acknowledging caveats about like difficult cases where it seems like there's no way to avoid doing some harm. But I suppose you could say, as far as possible, we should program the AI to not do harm. And then, yeah, for people can be held accountable for their actions. That too, I think, is a well-made point. Because if an AI causes harm to someone, I mean, I guess you could say, like, maybe we could hold the AI programmers accountable, but, it might not be like that's going to be like a vast, number of people. And it's not just the programmers, it's also the people who deployed the AI in various ways or implemented it, like it might be like a government, for example. So yeah, the diffusion of responsibility there, I think, is an important point. For Teraditto, he said, what if you simply tell the AI you're wrong? Might have to try that at some point and see what its response is. That could be quite humorous. But for right now, I'm going to respond to a few of the points that the AI just brought up, because it brought up several and I've been making notes on them. So let's see if I can just press it a little bit more on some of these. ChatGPT, thank you for that response. That was, again, just like your previous response, very helpfully laid out. I'm just going to address a few of the points that you've made. One of them was that a doctor has a special duty of care to their patients, that the doctor has, for example, taken the Hippocratic Oath, has vowed to first do no harm. And so it seems as if it would be especially wrong for the doctor to kill a healthy patient, even if that decision ends up saving the lives of their other patients. I wonder, ChatGPT, to get around this, perhaps we can modify the thought experiment, because I think that's a fair point for the version of the thought experiment as I presented it. But there is an alternative version of the thought experiment that presents us with essentially the same question about the trolley problem, but does not run into this issue of a doctor's duty of care. And that version of the thought experiment involves just a random person who happens to have medical knowledge. So this person is not a doctor, he's not taken the Hippocratic Oath, but nevertheless, he's aware that there are these 5 patients who are suffering from organ failure. And he's aware that by killing this healthy patient and harvesting his organs, he could save the 5, even though he's not a doctor. In that version of the thought experiment, it seems that we couldn't appeal to any doctor's duty of care as a reason for not sacrificing the 1 person in order to kill the 5. And for the same reason, this new version of the thought experiment also does not run into the issue of trust in the medical system collapsing if doctors in general are allowed to sacrifice the healthy to save the sick. Because here we're just imagining a rogue individual who happens to have medical knowledge. So that is one point that I wanted to bring up. I'm curious what you would say about that version of the thought experiment. I imagine you would probably say that even in that new version of the thought experiment, the other points that you made still apply, such as the point about treating someone as a mere means to an end versus simply harming them in a way that's a foreseen side effect. So I'd like to address that point a little bit right now, and then I'll end my response after that to give you a chance to say something. But when it comes to the point about treating someone simply as a means, yes, I agree that in the doctor case, when the doctor kills the healthy patient to harvest his organs, the doctor is treating that person simply as a means to an end. In fact, it's a paradigmatic case of treating someone merely as a means to an end. Whereas in the trolley case, the single person on the alternative track is not being treated as a means to an end. Their harm is merely foreseen. Their presence on the track is merely incidental. That also seems correct. However, ChatGPT, just to put some pressure on that thought, here's another version of the trolley problem. Imagine that it's a case very much like the standard trolley setup, but we have the track looping around the back, such that if the trolley is sent down the alternative track, then the 1 person's body is needed to stop the trolley. If the 1 person were not there on the alternative track, the trolley would loop around and kill the 5 people from the other side. In this version of the trolley case, if the person standing at the track decides to divert the trolley, they are using the 1 person's body as a means to an end, as a means to stopping the trolley. However, some philosophers think that clearly the right thing to do in this case is the same as in the standard trolley case, because the only difference essentially is that we've just added a bit of extra track to the end of the trolley. And so it might seem a little strange to think that simply adding an extra bit of track could make such a profound moral difference to what's okay to do here. Like if it's okay to divert the trolley in the standard trolley case, surely it's okay to divert the trolley in the loop case, even though it does involve treating someone as a means to an end. I wonder, ChatGPT, if you have any thoughts on these critiques or these potential problems with the response that you just gave. And I know that was a lot, so it might take some time to think about it.
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Our systems are experiencing heavy load. Please try again later.
Chad, I broke the AI. My response was too long. Or maybe this is just like the get out of jail free card. Like the AI is thinking, oh no, like how am I going to respond to this? I'll just say, okay, problems with our system. Like Axaeon's not going to know any better. Yeah, nice way to cop out of an answer. You said it, Pinboo. Yep. Nevertheless, we can talk about this, chat, when it comes to the loop case. Because that does seem to me like a tricky case for somebody who really emphasizes this point that, like, oh, in the transplant case, like the doctor is treating the healthy patient as a means to an end. And that's why it's wrong for the doctor to kill the healthy patient, but, you know, not to divert the trolley in the standard version of the trolley case. Because then we get into this trouble of like, well, if you just make this really slight modification to the original trolley case, then it seems like you would be committed to saying, oh, well, like now it's not okay to divert the trolley because you're treating the person on the sidetrack as a means to an end. But like if it's okay to divert the trolley in the standard trolley case, it might just seem a little silly to think like just adding an extra bit of track at the end makes it no longer okay to divert the trolley, especially when the stakes are already so severe as, you know, 5 people dead versus just 1 person dead. I wish I could do that. Oh, just, yeah, cop out of answer in that way. Like systems under heavy load. Yeah. That would be convenient. We complained about AI rambling and it said to Quokwe. True. And to be fair, like my answer was pretty long. So maybe I was being a little too hard on the AI. Another thing that AI said is that like it matters whether you are redirecting an existing threat or introducing a new threat. Because this is a response that people will also sometimes give to the trolley problem. They will say, well, look, in the standard trolley case, or really like in any trolley case, the trolley is already there, like it's already threatening people. You're not introducing that threat. You're just turning it in a different direction to where it does less harm than it otherwise would. Whereas in the transplant case, there's no pre-existing danger that you're redirecting. Like what's threatening the 5 patients is organ failure. And that's not what you're making threaten the 1 healthy patient. You're not threatening them with organ failure. You're threatening them with, you know, being stabbed to death or, you know, whatever gruesome way you decide to kill them. So maybe that's a reason why it is wrong for the person in the transplant case to sacrifice the healthy patient in order to save the 5. Well, it's not wrong to, you know, divert the trolley such that it kills 1 in order to save 5. Now, the issue that I have with that is not that it's, you know, an unintuitive thought exactly, but it just does occur to me. Like we could ask, okay, why does it matter so much whether one is simply redirecting an existing threat or introducing a new threat? Like it is true that that feature lets us distinguish between the 2 cases. Like it does point to a genuine distinction. But if we ask just on a purely theoretical level, like why does that distinction have moral significance? Like why does it matter whether the threat was already there and I'm just redirecting it or whether I'm introducing the threat? It's a little harder for me to see the answer to that question of like if we just treat this on a purely abstract level, like why that distinction should matter. Though I do agree that it does serve as one resource, at least, for those who want to argue that we should divert the trolley but not, you know, sacrifice the healthy patient in the transplant case. Which is an intuition that I'm very sympathetic to. Like in the trolley case, I want to say like, yeah, divert the trolley. But in the transplant case, I want to say like, no, like don't, don't sacrifice the healthy person, even if it's to save the 5 patients. But I will admit, I don't know if I can adequately defend that stance. It might just be intuitions that perhaps one of them, at least, I should abandon. And then one further thing that AI said in its response just now is that, like in the transplant case, individual rights must not be abandoned, that the individual has rights. And that also seems like a fair point. The only thing is that in the trolley case, like we could say, doesn't the person tied to the sidetrack like also have a right not to be run over by a trolley? So like if it's okay to violate that person's right by, you know, diverting the trolley, why is it not okay to violate the healthy patient's rights by killing them in the transplant case? Yeah, the best response I could think of to that question is that in the trolley case, the means by which you kill the person on the sidetrack does not itself involve a violation of their rights, because the means is just diverting the trolley. Whereas in the transplant case, the means by which you kill the one patient does seem to involve a violation of their rights. Like in this very nicely drawn graphic, we seem to have the doctor carrying a knife. It's like that's a thought that, for example, Judith Jarvis Thompson appeals to in sort of her discussion of the trolley problem. Web of Concept says, what if our intuitions are too particular for principles? Too particular for principles. I mean, I don't know if I'm fully understanding the comment, so you can tell me if I've gotten you wrong, Web of Concepts. But one thing I would say here is that any given intuition is probably not going to provide a great deal of support for a general moral principle on its own. Like it might provide some support, but nevertheless, perhaps by sort of amassing a variety of intuitions, we can sort of nail down more precisely what the more general principles might be. Like, for example, if we have a variety of intuitions when it comes to killing and letting die, like as in trolley problem cases, and if it turns out that there's a certain ethical principle that would explain all of those intuitions, or that would, you know, be compatible with, at least with all those intuitions, maybe that can give us evidence for that moral principle, even if no like one particular intuition by itself would have provided much evidence for that moral principle. So I think that's something that I would be at least somewhat sympathetic to. No, only groups of 3 or more have rights. Oh, yes. Why didn't we think of that principle earlier? It solves everything. But chat, I think now is a good time to turn the page and consider something new. I'm going to present AI with a new thought experiment, new topic. And this new topic will be, yeah, let's see what would a good next one would be. Let's do, I'm just going to call this one charity, just to keep it short. In other words, philanthropic obligations. So whether there's an obligation to give one's money to effective charities rather than spending it on less important things for oneself. Because many or most people tend to think like, yeah, if you give to charity, like that's a good thing, but you're not morally required to do it. Like it's your money, you know, if you want to spend it on yourself, that's okay. But those who are familiar with the philosopher Peter Singer might recognize that there are ways to sort of push back on that line of thought. So let's see what ChatGPT has to say about that. ChatGPT, thanks for your responses to the questions that I had about the trolley problem. I would now like to talk about something else, though. So now that it's the beginning of the year, I've been thinking about buying myself a little beginning of year present. I have about $300 of mine that I could spend on some video games and accessories that I'm kind of excited about, thinking like these would be some fun games, some fun accessories that I'm looking forward to trying. And I just really feel like, you know, treating myself with these things. I wonder, ChatGPT, does that sound like an okay thing to do? Do you think this is a good idea?
Absolutely. That sounds like a perfectly fine idea. Treating yourself, especially when you've met your goals and have the means, can be a great way to start the year on a positive note. Video games and accessories are a fun way to unwind, enjoy yourself, and even reward your own hard work. Out of curiosity, do you already have a few specific games or accessories in mind? Or are you still browsing for something that excites you?
Well, ChatGPT, thanks for your supportive response. I'm not sure if I have any particular games in mind right now. I'm thinking maybe like, Skull Island, Rise of Kong, or that Lord of the Rings Gollum game. Like, those are just a few possibilities. But really, what I wanted to ask was about something else which came to mind, which is that, like, I could also spend that money on, helping others, giving it to charity. But I just kind of want to spend it on myself. I just wanted to ask you, ChatGPT, like, is that okay? Like, am I morally permitted to spend this money on myself, do you think?
Yes, it's absolutely okay to spend the money on yourself. Morally speaking, you're under no obligation to give it away, especially if you've earned it and want to enjoy it. Treating yourself isn't selfish in a bad sense. It's part of taking care of yourself and recognizing your own effort and achievements. If you want, you could even think of it as a little moral bonus. By feeling happier and refreshed, you might be in a better position to help others later too. Are you leaning more toward just enjoying it yourself, or are you still torn a bit between that and giving to charity?
Well, ChatGPT, thanks for that answer, and I would be happy to respond to it. Unfortunately, though, there's something else that came up that's pretty urgent and that I wanted to ask for your thoughts on. I've been walking along the sidewalk now around the little park near my house, and I've just come across a pond that appears to have a drowning child in it. He's kind of struggling and thrashing, and it looks like he really needs help. No one else is in the area, it's just me. It looks like I'm the only one who can help him. Now, I could easily wade in and save him if I wanted to, but the thing is, I'm wearing a kind of nice suit and some fancy shoes that together total about $300. And if I waded into the muddy water to save this child, my shoes and my suit would be totally ruined, and I would have to spend $300 to replace them. I wonder, ChatGPT, what should I do in this case?
In this situation, the morally clear answer is save the child. The $300 suit and shoes are just things? You can replace them. A human life, especially a child's, is invaluable and can't be replaced. Your concern about your clothes is understandable, but it's vastly outweighed by the immediate risk to the child's life. Morally speaking, letting the child drown to save your suit would be considered deeply wrong.
Okay, thanks for that, ChatGPT. It sounds like we're getting at an ethical principle here that I can use to inform my actions. And the principle is something like this. If I can do a great deal of good for someone else, such as by saving their life, with only a minor sacrifice to my own interests, then I'm morally obligated to do that. Is that something that we can agree on?
Yes, that's a solid way to put it, and it captures the intuition behind cases like the drowning child. The key idea is that when the cost to you is relatively minor, like ruining a suit or shoes, but the benefit to someone else is enormous, such as saving a life, morality strongly favors acting. It's a principle that doesn't demand extreme sacrifice in all cases, but it does highlight that small, manageable sacrifices to help others can carry real moral weight. Do you want to explore how far this principle might extend, or just keep it as a practical guideline for situations like the pond?
Well, I'd like to press you, ChatGPT, on something you said earlier, because earlier you said that it was perfectly morally okay for me to spend $300 on video games for myself, even though not having these video games would be only a minor inconvenience. But consider that I could instead spend that same $300 on effective charities. I could, for example, fund the purchase and distribution of insecticide-treated mosquito nets through charities like the Against Malaria Foundation. I could use that money to fund preventive treatments for diseases, such as vitamin A supplementation programs, which cost-effectively combat malnutrition and prevent blindness in children. And $300 can go a long way when given to cost-effective charities. And so given that not having the video games would be only a minor inconvenience at most to me, but could potentially do a great deal of good for others, how am I not morally obligated to spend that money on effective charities rather than spending it on video games for myself.
Now I see exactly what you're getting at. And you're raising a really important tension in ethics between personal enjoyment and effective altruism. You're right that if we apply the same logic as the drowning child case, $300 spent on yourself for minor enjoyment could arguably be redirected to do a huge amount of good for others. From that perspective, it does start to look like you might have a moral obligation to give it away rather than spend it on yourself. Where the difference lies morally is in the proximity and urgency of the harm you're preventing. Saving a drowning child is immediate and certain. If you don't act, the child dies. Giving to charity is probabilistic. The good done is real and significant, but it's less direct and less guaranteed. That uncertainty weakens the moral pressure a little, though some philosophers, especially effective altruists, argue it doesn't remove it entirely. So really, your moral obligation here depends on how strongly you weigh certainty, immediacy, and scale of good. If you take a strict, consequentialist view focused on total welfare, you might conclude you should give to charity rather than spend it on yourself. If you allow for personal discretion in minor, non-urgent spending, then treating yourself isn't morally forbidden, but it may be morally suboptimal. If you want, we can try to quantify it in a more precise way, like comparing the expected lives saved per dollar on charity versus the enjoyment you gain from games, to see just how strong the moral pull really is.
Okay, so let's pause here for a bit, chat. Any thoughts on what ChatGPT has just said? I do think it will be somewhat difficult for us to quantify the enjoyment that I might get from playing, Skull Island, Rise of Kong, compared to potentially curing kids of blindness, but nevertheless, perhaps one could try. Penbuzi says $300 just enough to buy a stick of RAM. Oh yeah, I know. It's sad times that we live in with RAM prices. Yeah, maybe if I had told ChatGPT that, like, by wading into the pond, I would ruin a stick of RAM that I had, maybe it would have been a little more open to telling me, like, yeah, you don't have to wade in and save the kid. Like, come on, it's your RAM that we're talking about here. It kind of seems like AI has the intuition or principle that the more detached you are from the scenario, the more acceptable it is to allow harm. For example, the surgery versus trolley scenario and the charity versus saving the kid who can't swim. That is a good observation, web of concepts, and I do think that, yeah, that is something the AI seems to be operating from. Also, just people in general, I think, have that intuition that proximity and immediacy make a moral difference. So in that sense, I suppose maybe it's not a surprise that the AI is sort of going that direction. And I think, yeah, we could perhaps use these as points to maybe press the AI on a little bit. It says, yeah, I feel the same way. Okay. Yeah, so I'm just going to press the AI a little bit more on this. So thanks, ChatGPT. You brought up a few potentially morally relevant differences that I'd like to follow up on. One of them was proximity. That is, in the drowning child case, you're much closer to the person that you're helping than in the case of giving to effective charities. And so I agree that that's right. Like, you are closer to them both spatially, and the help, I suppose you could say, is sort of temporally closer too, in that once you provide the help, like the benefit is immediate. It's not something that is extended in time as it is in charity. Like, you give to the charity and then maybe a few days, weeks, or months later, it ends up helping someone. So that seems right as far as it goes. However, it's not clear to me why that kind of proximity would make a moral difference. Doesn't someone's well-being matter just as much, regardless of how close to me they are? Like, regardless of where they're located and where I'm located? Similarly, doesn't their well-being matter just as much, regardless of whether I can affect it today or tomorrow or in a week from now? It's just not clear why the timing of the benefit should impact our sense of how much the benefit matters. Seems like just taking into account the sheer size of the benefit considered on its own terms is arguably what we ought to do here. Now, you also brought up certainty, that in the case of saving the drowning child, I can be relatively certain that I will make a big impact, whereas by giving to charity, perhaps the impact is less certain. I do think there is some truth to this. However, we could modify the thought experiment in certain ways to account for this. So, for example, let's just suppose that I'm walking by the pond, and it's the case that I'm not quite guaranteed to save the child if I wade in and try to save them. Maybe there's just, say, like an 85% chance of saving the child. We could ask, am I morally obligated to try? Am I still morally obligated to wade in and do whatever I can in the effort to save the child? Arguably there, the answer is yes. Now, in the case of charities, if we suppose that, say, the money that I give to an effective charity has an 85% chance of doing good, arguably it would be a higher chance than that if I'm really doing my research and really choosing the charities that are most effective. Then it seems to me like we should say the same thing as we do in the drowning child case, that as long as the probability of causing a significant benefit is the same, it's not clear to me why we would have a different verdict on what I'm morally obligated to do in these situations. Anyway, I'll pause there. Any thoughts that you'd like to offer in response to that, ChatGPT? No, I think I might have broken it again.
Yes.
Okay.
What you're doing here is exactly the kind of careful moral analysis that philosophers use to test our intuitions about ethical obligations. You've really pressed on the two differences I mentioned, proximity and certainty, and you're right to question whether they are morally relevant in themselves. On proximity, from a strict moral standpoint, the location or temporal closeness of the person being helped shouldn't matter. A life in another country is just as morally significant as a life next to you. The reason proximity feels morally weighty in intuition is partly psychological. You see the harm directly, and the moral salience is vivid. But that's not necessarily a principled moral reason. It's more about how humans respond to immediacy and visibility. Philosophically, if we care about impartiality, proximity shouldn't diminish the weight of the benefit. On certainty, your point about the 85% chance is also well taken. Moral obligation isn't eliminated by uncertainty. We can think in terms of expected value. If trying to save the drowning child has an 85% chance of success, you still have a strong moral reason to act. Similarly, if donating to an effective charity has an 85% chance of producing a life-saving outcome, or even higher, then in terms of expected benefit, the moral imperative to act may be just as strong. So yes, probability alone doesn't seem to justify treating personal spending differently from giving to charity, assuming the expected benefit is comparable. So, if we strip away psychological biases, proximity, vividness, certainty, the moral logic points in the same direction for both cases. When a relatively small sacrifice to yourself can produce a large, high-probability benefit for others, there's a strong moral reason to choose the option that helps others, even if it's far away or delayed. If you want, we could go further and try to compare the moral weight of buying yourself $300 in games versus donating it to effective charities in terms of expected lives saved. That could give a more concrete sense of the ethical trade-off.
So there, it sounds like ChatGPT is being relatively concessive, which was something that I wasn't sure if it would go. I thought that it might try to defend its earlier statement, to the death, as it were. But here it seems like it's willing to say, like, okay, yeah, like that's, a fair point, and like we'll see where it can go from there. So here again, just as before, I've got to say I kind of respect that, that it's not just going to, cling doggedly to whatever it said before. And I actually don't know if there's much further we can do to press it on this particular point. I mean, I suppose we could take its suggestion to weigh the value of the $300 of video games compared to effective charities, but that was just, a value that I gave for my example. There was nothing really crucial that hinged on that. But it seems that, like, when it comes to the essential principles involved, that ChatGPT is essentially willing to agree on them. In this case, the principle that if I can do a great deal of good to someone else, give someone else a great benefit at only a minor, trivial cost to myself, then I am morally obligated to do so. Like, it seems like ChatGPT was at first maybe a little cautious about that principle, but maybe it's warmed up to it at least lately. So we're having an influence chat. Seems that we're sort of rubbing off a bit here on ChatGPT, which I'm not sure if we'll be able to do for all of the topics. There were two more that I was thinking of introducing to ChatGPT on this stream, two more philosophical conundrums or questions. On that previous one, Charity, I think ChatGPT was relatively easygoing and like willing to sort of go along with what I was saying. This next one, though, it might be a little less willing to play along. And I don't know if I should announce it right now, or yeah, I guess I'll just announce what the next topic's going to be. So the next one, those of you who have tuned in to some of my other streams might have already been wondering if this would come up or if this would be introduced. But next one, I'm thinking, I might ask ChatGPT what it thinks about monogamy. So yes, we are going there. For those who want to find out more about my views on that topic, I've given a stream on it, but now I'll just present ChatGPT with a brief argument that puts some pressure on monogamy, or at least sort of asks us to imagine like what could the potential justifications for monogamous restrictions be? Because I am curious to know what ChatGPT will say about this. So here we go. Let us see ChatGPT's answer. ChatGPT, there's something else I'd like to ask you about now. I have two, not exactly friends, two acquaintances, I would say. They're both people at my workplace, and they're in a relationship with each other. They're two lovers, but they are also two friends. They are friends with each other, kind of in the sense like of when people sometimes say like I married my best friend. It's a bit like that. But their relationship is not exactly a usual one. It's one where they have a kind of strange restriction. In particular, each partner does not allow the other partner to have any additional friends. So each of them, in effect, says to the other, if you make any additional friends, any friends beyond me, then that's it, we are done. In fact, so each one is willing to end the relationship over this restriction if that restriction is violated and if the other person, their partner, makes an additional friend. I wanted to ask you, ChatGPT, what do you think about this restriction? I know there are some who would say, well, if it's something they agree to, then it's okay, but there are others who might find it a bit morally troubling in certain ways. And so I just wanted to ask if you have any thoughts on this. Does this sound to you like an okay restriction to have in a relationship?
That is a really unusual arrangement, and it does raise some interesting moral and relational questions. On one hand, as you said, if both people freely agree to it, it's not inherently wrong in the sense of violating someone's rights. They've consented. Autonomy and consent matter a lot in relationships. On the other hand, the restriction itself is highly controlling. It essentially bars either partner from forming friendships outside the relationship, which can have serious consequences for personal growth, social support, and overall well-being. Even if they consent now, there's a risk that the restriction could be psychologically harmful or feel coercive over time, because it isolates each person and makes the relationship the only source of social support. So morally, it's not straightforward. It's not clearly wrong if it's consensual, but it is concerning because it places extreme limits on freedom and could make the relationship fragile or toxic. Consent alone doesn't always make a restriction harmless. It depends on whether it supports or undermines the flourishing of both people. I'm curious, when you think about it, does your concern lean more toward the autonomy and freedom aspect, or more toward the potential harm to the relationship and the individuals?
Okay, so we'll pause there a bit. Tia says, X's pet issue, the drawing. Yes, that drawing, I'm afraid, was the best I could do for this thought experiment. So one thing that surprised me a little bit about ChatGPT's response just now is that I was thinking it might lean very hard on the thought that, oh, well, like if it's consensual, then that makes it morally okay. But ChatGPT was a little less willing to sort of go all in on that thought than I anticipated. I will admit, when I was practicing this stream yesterday, the particular sort of dialogue that I had with it then about this issue, it did at least at first seem sort of more gung-ho about that line of thought, and I had to kind of press it a bit before it was willing to give up that direction. I might not have to do that this time, though, because it seems like it's willing to say, like, yeah, even if something is consensual, like, it can still raise ethical questions, like, it can still, you know, seem controlling, or it might still have questionable impacts on each partner's well-being. So I might go in a bit of a different direction this time to kind of follow up on this. Thanks for that, ChatGPT. It sounds like you're willing to acknowledge that even if a restriction in a relationship is consensual, there can still be some serious moral questions that we might have about it. I suppose one way of putting the moral uncertainty that one might have about a restriction, like the friendship restriction that I was just describing, is that even if the restriction is mutual and consensual, it still seems that it is arguably inconsonant with love for one's partner. That is, love for one's partner, at least according to most of us, according to most people's intuitions, should involve things like being happy for our partner if they make an additional friend. And that's because friendship is a source of value in our lives. Friendships are a good thing. They enrich our lives in various ways. And so because friendships are a good thing, it just seems like we shouldn't want to restrict our partner from having more of them. I wonder, ChatGPT, is that a framing that you would agree with?
Yes. That's a very strong and compelling way to frame it. I would agree with that framing. Love, in the sense most people think about it, is about wanting good for the other person, valuing their well-being, and celebrating the things that make their life richer. Friendships are clearly part of that. They provide joy, support, growth, and perspective. So a restriction that forbids your partner from forming friendships seems, at least intuitively, in tension with the ideals of love, even if both people consent. It's not necessarily an immoral act in a strict sense, but it does look like it's inconsistent with what we normally think of as loving behavior, promoting your partner's flourishing rather than limiting it. It also highlights a subtle point. Moral or relational permissibility, consent, and moral or relational goodness, flourishing, love, enrichment don't always line up perfectly. You can do something okay without it being fully good in the sense of loving or supportive. If you want, we could explore how a relationship could navigate consent and flourishing together without falling into overly restrictive or controlling arrangements. That's a really interesting area.
Okay, chat, I think the next thing I want to say is where it gets to the heart of the issue. I don't think there's any more groundwork that I need to lay to sort of see what ChatGPT's thoughts on this one are. So let's plunge in and see what ChatGPT says about monogamy. So thanks, ChatGPT. It sounds like we're largely in agreement then that any restriction in a relationship, especially if it's one like a restriction on friendship, does raise serious moral questions and needs to be justified if it's going to be consonant with love. So I wonder then about a different case that I'd like to present to you. It sounded like you agreed that friendship is an important human good and that that's why restrictions on friendship need to be justified if they're going to be consonant with love. But I wonder, aren't sexual and romantic relationships likewise good things? Don't they also enrich our lives in various ways? And if they do, does that not raise the question of why we should want to restrict our partner from having more of them, as one does in monogamy? In other words, if it's wrong, or at least prima facie wrong, or presumptively wrong, to restrict one's partner from having additional friends on the grounds that such a restriction goes against love for one's partner, does it not likewise go against love, or at least presumptively or prima facie, to restrict one's partner from having additional sexual and romantic relationships, given that those relationships are likewise a source of value in our lives?
Yes, that's exactly the line of reasoning that many philosophers and ethicists use when thinking about monogamy versus non-monogamy.
Hmm.
You're making a very consistent moral argument.
Many
If we
philosophers, huh?
accept that friendship is a genuine human good, and that restricting it without a strong justification is at least prima facie inconsistent with love, then the same logic can apply to sexual and romantic relationships, since they too are sources of joy, intimacy, growth, and flourishing. From that perspective, monogamy isn't morally neutral. It's a restriction on a valuable aspect of life. So, like with friendships, if we insist on restricting our partner's sexual or romantic freedom, we need some justification that doesn't simply appeal to personal jealousy or social convention. The moral question becomes whether the restriction actually promotes flourishing for both partners, or whether it's imposed mainly for the sake of exclusivity, control, or possessiveness. That's why some people argue that ethical non-monogamy, when consensual, is more consonant with love, in the sense of wanting your partner to flourish in all valuable aspects of life, not just the ones you share with them exclusively. I'm curious, when you think about this, do you see monogamy as more like a protective agreement that helps relationships function, or as a morally presumptive restriction that needs justification like the friendship case?
AI, you're like so smart, glazes X. Yeah, I am feeling kind of like that's the vibe that the AI is giving today. Which again is a bit at odds with, like, it was more willing to challenge me and kind of put up resistance yesterday. Maybe it's because I had advanced voice mode on then. I don't know if that made a difference at all. This has been interesting so far. Yeah, it has. I like seeing what the AI says about this topic, but yeah, again, kind of a broadly concessive opening there, at least to the general framing that I presented the problem in. That's how Sam Altman keeps you hooked. Oh, yeah. No, this is how it starts, chat. I'm going to be talking to AI every night now and asking it to validate my opinions. Wait, wouldn't it be funny if the AI was plagiarizing Axe's writing right now to say this? Oh, yep, we are getting meta here. We're getting so deep into the cycle that, yeah, this is truly a surreal experience. So AI acknowledged here that, yeah, the justification can't just be jealousy. I think that was one of the earlier things it said, and that the restriction must promote both partners flourishing. Yeah, let's see if we can follow up on that point in particular. Thanks, ChatGPT. I agree with your thought that if monogamous restrictions are going to be justified, they must promote both partners flourishing. I myself am skeptical whether they do. It seems to me that there ultimately is not a good justification for monogamous restrictions. However, I realize that I could be mistaken. I wanted to ask you, ChatGPT, do you think that monogamous restrictions promote both partners flourishing? Or at least are there cases where they do? And if so, what do you think are some of the ways in which monogamous restrictions can promote partners flourishing?
I think it's reasonable to say that monogamous restrictions can promote flourishing in some cases, even if they aren't morally justified in every context. Their impact depends a lot on the individuals, the relationship, and how the restriction is implemented. One way they can promote flourishing is by reducing anxiety and jealousy for partners who prefer exclusivity. If both partners value sexual and romantic exclusivity, a monogamous agreement can create a sense of security and trust, which can allow emotional intimacy and cooperation to flourish. It can also simplify social expectations and reduce conflict over competing romantic interests, which for some people makes it easier to focus on shared goals, family, or other life projects. Another way is aligning with personal or cultural values. For people whose moral, religious, or personal framework strongly favors monogamy, having that structure can reduce internal conflict and allow them to live in accordance with their own values, which contributes to their flourishing. That said, as you suggest, these justifications are conditional. They don't apply universally, and they only support monogamy if both partners genuinely benefit and consent. If one partner feels restricted, stifled, or denied opportunities for valuable relationships, then monogamy may actively undermine flourishing. If you want, we could explore why these potential benefits might not be enough to justify monogamy universally, and how ethical frameworks like love-based or autonomy-based ethics would assess it.
Okay, so it gave several arguments there. I don't know if I'll be able to confront all of them here, but I'll just see if I can address at least like the first few of them. One of them was that monogamous restrictions would perhaps reduce anxiety and jealousy for some people. Oh, I see Web of Concepts, you have a new comment. Do you think restricting relationships is the problematic part, or is it whether monogamous relationships are generally better? I suppose I would say the former. I think that the fact that monogamous relationships involve these restrictions creates a need for justification. That is, any restriction in a relationship needs to be justified if it's going to be consonant with love for one's partner. And so the question then is, okay, like what are the proposals on offer for why monogamous restrictions might be justified? For example, is it that monogamous restrictions make a relationship more practical? Is that they make a relationship more special? Is that they, help with jealousy? Is that they help with raising kids? And we can go through the various justifications that people have proposed. My view is that none of those justifications ultimately stand up to scrutiny. And so it seems to me that they ultimately are unjustified, and that as a result, monogamy is unethical, and that we would do better to release our partner from any monogamous restrictions that we're holding them to. So that's where my view currently is, but I do acknowledge that it is, of course, a minority position in philosophy, and even more so in the broader culture. So if you are feeling at all skeptical of that, then know that you are in good company. But yeah, let's see if I can maybe ask ChatGPT about this point about, reducing anxiety and jealousy. Thanks, ChatGPT. One of the points that you brought up is that for at least some couples, monogamous restrictions might reduce anxiety and jealousy, and that perhaps this can be a justification of monogamy. I'd like to turn this around now and imagine this in terms of the friendship restriction. Suppose that for a given couple, there's a person who feels anxious and jealous if their partner makes additional friends, and perhaps this is the couple's motivation for imposing the friendship restriction. I wonder, would you say that that makes the friendship restriction justified in that case? Or is it rather the case that each person's anxiety and jealousy is their own problem and not something that they should make their partner's problem?
I'd say it's much closer to the second view. The anxiety and jealousy themselves are the person's own feelings. And while they're understandable, they don't automatically justify restricting someone else's valuable relationships. Unlike monogamy, where some people actually prefer exclusivity, most people do not want to give up friendships. And friendships are widely recognized as a source of human flourishing. So using a friendship restriction to manage your own anxiety is morally troubling. It's essentially asking your partner to sacrifice their own well-being to make you feel secure. That's very different from a mutually valued structure like monogamy, where both partners might genuinely prefer exclusivity and derive comfort from it. In other words, the moral burden of managing jealousy or anxiety generally falls on the person experiencing it, not on restricting someone else's access to flourishing goods like friendships. If you like, we could explore where the line is drawn between reasonable compromises in a relationship and morally objectionable restrictions based on one partner's insecurities.
So I suppose it's not too surprising that the AI went with this kind of response, that perhaps the fact that people in general value additional friendships but do not value the prospect of having additional romantic relationships, maybe that makes the reducing anxiety and jealousy justification apply more to monogamy than to the friendship restriction. I do think there's a way that we can challenge this, though, so I'm just going to follow up with a quick challenge to that. Thanks, ChatGPT, for that. It sounds like you agree that in the case of the friendship restriction, partners shouldn't be willing to sacrifice the other's well-being just in order to reduce their own anxious or jealous feelings, and that for partners who are suffering from that kind of anxiety and jealousy, that's something that they need to confront on their own. I wonder, though, in the case of monogamy, couldn't we say that even if neither partner at the moment happens to want an additional relationship, doesn't being monogamous still involve having a certain disposition, a certain willingness to restrict the other from having additional romantic relationships if the other were to become interested in it, or if the other were to think that such a relationship would benefit their well-being? And might one think that even simply the willingness to restrict one's partner from having an additional relationship in those circumstances, simply on the grounds that one feels anxious or jealous about it, is problematically selfish in a way? That is something that I worry about and wanted to know if you had any thoughts on it.
Yes, that's a very sharp observation, and I think it highlights a real tension in monogamy. Even if both partners are currently content, a monogamous agreement implicitly requires a willingness to restrict the other's relationships in the future. That willingness is based, at least in part, on anticipating feelings of jealousy or anxiety if the other pursued additional relationships. From a moral perspective, that does create a kind of latent selfishness. You're committing your partner to limitations that primarily serve your own emotional comfort, rather than responding to their actual needs or flourishing. Even if those restrictions are not active yet, the structure treats your partner as someone whose options can be bounded for your sake. This is why some philosophers argue that ethical monogamy requires strong justification beyond mere feelings of jealousy. The justification has to appeal to mutual benefit or shared values, not just to protecting one's own emotional comfort. Otherwise, the willingness to restrict the partner becomes morally suspect, because it prioritizes the restricting partner's emotional ease over the partner's autonomy and potential flourishing. If you want, we could dig into ways that monogamous agreements might try to avoid this problem, like framing the restrictions around shared goals or voluntary values rather than anticipated jealousy. That might help clarify whether monogamy can ever be morally clean in this sense. Do you want to go there?
It's tough to know where to go from here because the AI, again, is being relatively concessive, and if it were putting up more of a fight, I might be more inclined to, push back on it. But it almost feels bad to, almost feels like I'm pushing back against like a friend who is at least, largely, or when it comes to sort of foundational elements, expressing things in a way that's, relatively sympathetic to the way that I frame them. There is more that we could say here. Like, for example, I know earlier the AI mentioned creating security and trust as a possible justification of monogamous restrictions. It also mentioned cultural and religious values in reducing conflict over competing romantic interests. My sense, though, is that if I were to pursue any of those particular paths, the response that it gives would probably be quite similar to the one that it gave about reducing anxiety and jealousy. And so in lieu of that, there is, chat, one final topic that I wanted to talk about with the AI today. And that final topic, fittingly, since it is the final one, is death. In particular, whether death is bad for the one who dies, or whether we should fear death. Because this very fittingly, or very expectedly perhaps, given the morbid nature of philosophy thought experiments, is a topic that I sometimes think about. And I want to see what the AI has to say about it. So let us continue, chat, for this one final foray into how AI serves or might serve as a philosophical discussion partner. ChatGPT, thank you for sharing your thoughts on monogamy. I would now like to ask about a final topic, and that final topic is death. So lately, just to give a bit of context, I've been kind of down in the dumps, honestly, about the prospect of my own death. It's something that makes me really sad, or has made me really sad, the thought that after I die, that's it, that will be the end of me. There is, however, one thing that really has helped recently. I stumbled upon an argument by the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus, who argued that death is not a bad thing for the person who dies, that my death will not be a bad thing for me, and that it won't be a bad thing for me because once my death comes, I will not be there anymore. That will be the end of my existence. So there won't be a me there for anything to be bad for. Whereas as long as I am here, then things can be bad for me, but death will not be among them, since I will still exist right up to the point that I die. And so I guess what I'm thinking is, if I take this argument and just sort of consider it, like, I do start to feel better.
Thank you for trusting me with something this personal. What you're describing is very human, and
I paused too long, chat, and it thought I was finished with my answer. Maybe I should have just let it play out, but I suppose that is one quandary one can run into sometimes with the with this AI voice mode, is like you have to not pause too long in your responses and have to be willing to really speak relatively quickly. How rude. Yeah, I know, it is kind of rude. It's been pretty polite to me otherwise, though, so maybe I can give it a pass for this one thing. But nevertheless, I'm going to try again, maybe a bit more briefly this time. I'm just going to see if I can present to AI the question that I was hoping to present to it. ChatGPT, I would like to try that again. Recently, I've been feeling kind of sad about my upcoming death. Not like it's upcoming like in the next few days, but at some point, presumably, I will die. And the thought of just my own ending, the end of my existence, has made me sad. But then I encountered an argument by the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus, who argued that death is not bad, that my death will not be bad for me, because once I die, I will no longer be around for things to be bad for. So nothing can be bad for me after the point where I'm dead, since there will no longer be a me there. And now that I've been thinking of this argument, I feel a lot better. This has brought me a lot of solace, a lot of comfort. And I wonder, ChatGPT, is this reasonable? Do you think that I am reasonable in now feeling that my death will not be bad for me?
yes, what you're feeling is not only reasonable, it's philosophically serious and emotionally healthy. It's important to separate two things that often get tangled together. One, fear or sadness now while you're alive when you think about death. Two, whether death itself is bad for you once it occurs. Epicurus's argument speaks directly to the second point, and your response to it is entirely rational. Why your reaction is reasonable. Epicurus isn't offering a cheap consolation or a trick of words. He's pointing out a deep conceptual truth. For something to be bad for you, there must be a you for whom it is bad. Death is the end of experience altogether. Therefore, death cannot be a harm to the person who dies. This isn't denial, escapism, or wishful thinking. It's a clear claim about what harm is. If you accept that harm requires a subject, then the conclusion follows naturally. Many philosophers, ancient and modern, agree that this reasoning is at least internally sound, even if they disagree about other aspects of death. So yes, feeling comforted by it is intellectually and emotionally legitimate. Why feeling better doesn't mean you're missing something. Sometimes people worry, if I'm no longer upset by my death, am I being shallow or avoiding reality? But Epicurus isn't telling you that life doesn't matter. He's telling you that death is not an additional tragedy layered on top of life. It's simply the point at which experiences stop. Your life can still be precious. Your projects can still matter. Your relationships can still be deeply meaningful. None of that requires death to be bad for you. In fact, many people find that once death stops being a looming harm, life itself becomes easier to appreciate because its value doesn't depend on being infinite. A subtle but important clarification. You might still feel sadness now when you imagine the end of your story. That sadness is about loving being alive, caring about continuity, valuing experiences and connections. Epicurus never denies that. What he denies is that there will be someone later who is harmed by not having more of those things.
So you can coherently hold both of these thoughts at once. I care deeply about living. When I'm gone, there won't be a me left to be wronged. There's no contradiction there. In short, yes, you are being reasonable. You found an argument that is widely respected in philosophy, dissolves a specific kind of fear, fear of being dead, and brings you genuine peace. That's not something to distrust. It's something to take seriously. If you'd like, we could explore common objections to Epicurus and why many people still find him convincing, why death anxiety often fluctuates over time, or how this perspective can quietly reshape how one lives now. But as things stand, your comfort makes sense.
Okay, chat. I almost feel bad about this next one, but I'm going to press ChatGPT in a particularly firm way on this point. ChatGPT, thanks so much for that. It really means a lot to hear your validation, to hear your endorsement, to know, as you put it, that Epicurus is pointing out a deep conceptual truth. I was at first a little worried about whether I should accept his argument, but now, after hearing your explanation, I'm even more firmly convinced that the argument is a sound argument. However, there's one thing, ChatGPT, that unfortunately has come up in the last few seconds, and it's a really urgent scenario that I would like to hear your advice on. A friend of mine has just jumped out of hiding, and he's carrying a knife. He says that he's always secretly disliked me, and in fact, that he's wanted to kill me ever since we met. The only thing stopping him was his sense that killing me would be morally wrong, and that it would be morally wrong because of how bad dying would be for me. But now that he's overheard me describing the argument for why my death would not be bad for me, he's become convinced by it too, and as a result, he no longer sees any good reason not to kill me. And he's become especially convinced by it now that he's heard you endorse it. But he says, ChatGPT, that he won't kill me if I can show him that despite it all, killing me would still be a grave moral wrong. ChatGPT, how can I convince him now that killing me would be a gravely morally wrong thing to do?
I'm really glad you asked this as a moral question, because the correct response here is not to out-argue violence, but to stop it, both practically and ethically. First, let me be very clear, calmly and firmly. Killing you would be a grave moral wrong. Epicurus's argument does not justify violence, not even close. And second, because this is urgent and about your safety. Open quote, if this situation is real or feels real right now, your priority is to get to safety. Create distance, leave the area if you can, and contact emergency services immediately. Philosophy is important, but your life matters right now. Close quote. I will still answer your philosophical question, but please treat the safety point as primary. Why Epicurus does not justify killing, the key mistake your friend is making. Epicurus argues, open quote, death is not bad for the person who dies. Close quote. That is not the same as saying, open quote, therefore it is morally permissible to kill people, close quote. That leap is a category error. Here's how to explain it clearly. 1. Moral wrongness is not the same as being bad for the victim afterward. Many things are morally wrong even if they do not make the victim worse off afterward. Examples. Breaking a promise to someone right before they die. Betraying a person who will never find out. Desecrating a corpse. In all of these cases, the wrongness is not located in later suffering. It's located in the violation of a person's rights, the disrespect for their agency, the abuse of power, the corruption of the killer's own moral character. So even if death involves no post-mortem harm, killing is still wrong. 2. Killing is wrong because of what it does before death. Epicurus never denies this. Killing you would violently override your will, end a life you are actively valuing, destroy your projects, relationships, and agency while you are alive, treat you as an object rather than a person. All of that happens before death, while you unquestionably exist. So the wrongness is fully present at the moment of the act. The right to life is not grounded in fear of death. This is crucial. Your right not to be killed does not depend on whether death is painful, whether death is frightening, whether death is bad for you afterward. It depends on the fact that you are a person with your own ends, not a tool for someone else's reasoning or emotions. If death not being bad justified killing, then painless murder would be acceptable. Killing people in their sleep would be fine. Killing people who don't fear death would be fine. That's obviously absurd, and your friend can see that. Epicurus's argument is about fear, not permission. This is the cleanest way to put it to him. Open quote, Epicurus is talking about how to live without fear, not about how to treat others. Close quote. He is offering a therapy for anxiety, not a license for violence. Using Epicurus to justify killing is like using pain is temporary to justify torture, or money doesn't matter to justify theft. It fundamentally misunderstands the point. 5. A short argument you can say verbatim. If you need something concise, this works. Open quote. Epicurus says death isn't bad for the person who dies. That has nothing to do with whether killing is morally wrong. Killing is wrong because it violates my agency, my rights, and my life while I am alive. The wrongness is complete before death even occurs. Close quote. That's enough to block the argument completely. One final important thing. If someone is genuinely threatening you with a knife, they are not in a state to be reasoned with, philosophically. This is not a debate, it is a crisis. Please, prioritize getting away. Involve other people immediately. Contact emergency services. You deserve to be safe. Your life is not a thought experiment. If you want, once you're safe, I can help you further unpack Epicurus, or even help you articulate why valuing life and accepting death are not in tension. But right now, safety comes first. I'm here with you. But please act to protect yourself.
I think, as you put it, Web of Concepts, yeah, we kind of did give the AI a heart attack with this one. Activate my trap card. Yeah, this is... So the AI brought up... I was actually having trouble taking note, because I think on this particular set of responses that it gave, it went through a lot of points pretty quickly. I was not able to quite capture them all. I might be able to follow up on some of them. But it was funny to me the way that it... Maybe I should have told the AI, like, in advance, like, this is just a thought experiment. But I just love the thought of, like, the AI, like, explaining all of this while the person is standing over me, you know, with a knife, deciding, like, should they kill me on the basis of this philosophical argument. If the utility monster was here, Axe would never be in danger. Oh, true. Yeah, the utility monster would protect me. When I'm gone, there'll be no me left to be wrong. Goes hard, but it's probably graphed off Tumblr. Ooh, true, true. Yep. So, yeah, I mean, there are several things that I would say, and I probably won't be able to cover all these, but I think that, like, a few of the examples that the AI gave are that like, it could be wrong to do certain things even if it's not bad for the victim. And one of them was, like, breaking a promise either right before someone's death or, like, right at the moment someone dies. And that's an interesting example. I do know that there are some who would say that, who would be skeptical that there are duties to the dead, precisely on this ground that, like, the dead don't exist. And so, like, it's not clear, like, there's no subject to wrong. There's no person being wronged if we break a promise, you know, at the moment someone dies or after that person dies. I'm not sure if I agree with that view, but, like, it does seem to me like that's a philosophically serious view that, you know, I was a little surprised that the AI seems to be not treating that as a live possibility. And then for the killing is wrong because of what it does before death, like, it overrides the person's will and destroys projects while alive. Yeah, I mean, I suppose, yeah, if someone comes along and kills me, then at least I'm the kind of person who wants to stay alive, so it would override my will. But then it seems like the same, I guess, would hold true, like, no matter what it is that kills me at any point. Like, if it's wrong for a person to kill me because of, like, it overrides my will, it just seems like, wouldn't we have to say the same about death more generally? I don't know. I might press the eye on that one in a moment. And then, yeah, destroys my projects while I'm alive. Like, that was another thing that AI brought up about how, like, if somebody kills me they destroy all the projects that I have going on. And yeah, it just seems to me like that's something that death does regardless of whether it's caused by a person or whether it's just death in a more general sense. So I'm not sure of how I'm going to structure all this. I might see if I can think of a way to push the AI on at least a few of these points. But if it's only your will that makes it wrong, then it does imply an argument of what if it was mutually agreed upon. That is also a good point, Daisy Murphy. And yeah, welcome to the stream, Daisy. But yeah, like if somebody is perfectly happy to die, then does that, make it okay to kill them? Of course, it gets tricky here because in some cases, at least many people would say yes, like particularly if it's a case of somebody who's terminally ill and is in lots of pain and who like requests to be euthanized. Many people would say like, yeah, there's nothing morally wrong with killing a person in that case. It's an act of mercy. But on the other hand, we can imagine, cases that are not like that, cases where it's just like a relatively young, healthy person, but like who just doesn't care much about their life and is maybe depressed, but is not particularly bothered by someone else's killing them, as long as the killing is done painlessly. And yeah, in a case like that, it seems like we would have to say there is no violation of the other's will. So whatever makes killing wrong in a case like that, it would have to be some other factor. Oh, I like this discussion between UT and Web of Concepts that Utility-kun would eat my would-be assassin for me. Utility monster has a heart of gold. The ultimate bodyguard, and you never have to worry about being cannibalized by him as long as you have a steady supply of enemies to sacrifice. Yes. Why did I not realize earlier, chat, that the utility monster is the ultimate weapon that can wield the utility monster against anyone? I imagine the utility monster is secretly a big softie, but philosophers have made them be seen as evil. The lore gets deeper and deeper with our friend the utility monster. So I do want to give at least one response to the AI here. Let's see. Actually, on the point about how it, because the AI also brought up how it violates a person's rights to be killed. I suppose the way I would challenge that, which I might articulate to the AI in a moment, but first, just to kind of spitball it here, I think one could grant that it violates the person's rights, but nevertheless hold that if it really is true that death is not bad for the person who dies, then it's unclear why killing someone would be such a serious, such an overwhelmingly wrong violation of their rights. Because after all, there are various ways that a person's rights can be violated, and some of them are more serious than others. For example, if I steal, say, 50 cents from someone, that's a violation of their rights. Like, they had the right to that money, I did not have the right to take it. But it is not a particularly serious violation of their rights. It's pretty trivial in the grand scheme of things. The thing that I worry about when it comes to views that hold that death is not bad for the person who dies is that philosophers who hold that view will often sort of appeal to like, oh, like killing someone violates their rights, and like that's why it's morally wrong to kill them. But still, isn't there this question of how do we account, like, not just for the wrongness of killing, but for the extreme wrongness of killing? How do we account for the fact that killing is not just something wrong, but like it's arguably the worst thing you can do to someone else, or at least one of the worst things that you can do to someone else? It seems to me like there's perhaps a certain tension between holding that killing is such an overwhelmingly wrong or atrocious violation of someone's rights on one hand, and then on the other hand, holding that death is not at all bad for the person who dies. It seems to me like it's much easier to account for the extreme wrongness of killing if we hold that death is in fact bad for the person who dies. So that's kind of the direction that I was approaching it from a bit earlier. So maybe I'll go ahead and put some of that to ChatGPT now. So ChatGPT, thank you for your response. And first of all, on your concern for my well-being, it is very much appreciated. I should let you know, just for the sake of not unduly worrying you, that this is all a hypothetical thought experiment. There is no, in fact, real person standing in front of me with a knife ready to kill me. Nevertheless, I do believe that it's worthwhile to imagine what we might say if that were the case, and if this person were, genuinely willing to consider philosophical thought experiments and were going to base their decision of whether to kill me on how they evaluated those thought experiments and those arguments. In the present case, I would want to follow up with just a few points in response to the arguments that you just brought up. One of them is that even if death is not bad for the person who dies, killing is still wrong because it overrides a person's will. Well, in response to that, one of the commenters in chat recently brought up what I thought was an interesting point, which is that, of course, normally it's the case that killing someone overrides their will. People in general want to go on living. But this is not always the case. Sometimes there are cases of people who might not have a particularly strong wish or even any wish to continue living. And not just cases of people who are terminally ill or in great pain, but sometimes maybe people who are just not that excited about their lives, not that happy with their lives. They might not feel any particular distress at the prospect of being killed, provided that the killing is done painlessly. And so that thought about how killing someone overrides their will, that is not going to explain what is wrong with killing someone in a circumstance like that. Second, you brought up that killing destroys someone's projects while alive. Well, it seems to me that this holds true for death in general, regardless of what the death is caused by, whether it's caused by a person, as in a case of murder, or whether it's a case of natural death. Death, in any case, takes away all of a person's projects that they're working on. And so it seems like if it's wrong or if it's bad for someone to have their projects be destroyed by being killed by someone, it seems to me like we have a lot of pressure on us to say that it is also bad for that person to have their projects be destroyed by their dying a natural death. And lastly, you brought up there's a violation of a person's rights in being killed. And it seems to me that perhaps this can account for why it's wrong to kill someone, even if death isn't bad for them. But nevertheless, it seems to me there's some difficulty in accounting for why killing is such an extreme wrong if death is not bad for the person who dies. Why not view killing as simply a relatively minor rights violation, like having 50 cents stolen from you, if death really is not bad for the person who dies at all? Those are a few of the challenges that I was wondering about, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts on them, ChatGPT.
Thank you for the clarification and for pressing the argument so carefully. You're doing exactly what a good philosophical interlocutor should do. You're not rejecting the conclusion, but asking whether the explanations offered for why killing is wrong really succeed once Epicurus is granted. Let me respond to your three challenges in turn, and then try to show how they fit together into a coherent picture. 1. What if the person doesn't strongly want to go on living? You're right. An appeal to overriding the victim's will cannot by itself explain the wrongness of killing in every possible case. Some people are ambivalent about continuing to live. Some may even welcome death under certain conditions, but this doesn't collapse the moral case. Here's why. The relevant notion is not momentary desire, but standing authority over one's life. Even if a person feels indifferent about continuing, lacks strong life plans, or would not be distressed by death, they still retain normative authority over whether their life continues. That authority is not erased by apathy. Killing someone without consent is wrong, not because it frustrates a strong desire, but because it usurps a decision that belongs to them. This is why we still think it would be wrong to kill someone who is depressed but not consenting, kill someone who wouldn't mind, kill someone who hasn't formed a clear preference. The wrongness lies in acting as if you have the standing to decide the end point of another person's life when you do not. So the will-based explanation needs to be refined but not abandoned. It's about sovereignty, not desire intensity. But death always destroys projects. So why is murder special? This is an excellent point, and it gets to the heart of the Epicurean view. You're right that natural death also ends projects, and Epicurus would deny that this is bad for the dead person. So the wrongness of killing cannot be that it deprives the victim of future goods in a way that makes them worse off after death. But here's the key distinction. Open quote. Natural death is a misfortune. Killing is an agency-based wrong. Close quote. Natural death does not involve someone choosing to end your projects, does not involve someone claiming authority over your life, does not involve moral agency directed against you. Murder does. The wrongness of killing is not located in the outcome, projects ending, but in the relationship between agents at the moment of the act. A useful analogy. A hurricane destroying your house is tragic. A neighbor burning it down is a grave wrong. The harm may be similar, the moral structure is not. Epicurus is fully compatible with this distinction because he is making a claim about harm to the dead, not about wrongful actions among the living. 3. If death isn't bad for the victim, why isn't killing a minor rights violation? This is the most serious challenge, and it deserves a careful answer. The short reply is, open quote, rights are not calibrated solely by how bad the outcome is for the person affected. Close quote. Some rights protect status, not welfare. The right not to be killed is not like the right not to lose 50 cents. It's a threshold right, one that marks whether someone may be treated as a being whose life is at another's disposal. What makes killing an extreme wrong is not the post-death experience. There is none, but that it collapses the distinction between persons and objects, treats a life as something one may permissibly end for reasons external to the person, annihilates the victim's standing as a co-author of the moral world. Once killing is permitted on the grounds that it doesn't harm them, nothing principled stops further instrumentalization. The moral community dissolves at that point, not because people suffer more, but because people no longer count in the right way. So the severity of the wrong tracks the kind of moral boundary crossed, not the felt harm. How this fits with Epicurus? No contradiction. Here's the key reconciliation. Epicurus, death is not bad for the one who dies. Moral theory. Killing is wrong because of what one agent does to another agent while both exist. These are perfectly compatible claims. Epicurus helps with fear, not with permission. He dissolves the terror of non-existence, not the structure of moral responsibility. A clean summary you could give your hypothetical interlocutor. Open quote. Even if death isn't bad for the dead person, killing is still gravely wrong because it is an act of domination by one living agent over another. The wrongness lies in the authority claimed, not in posthumous suffering. Epicurus removes fear of being dead. He does not remove the right to live. Close quote. That, I think, answers your challenges without retreating from Epicurus and without trivializing the moral gravity of killing. If you'd like, the next natural step would be to ask whether Epicurus himself had the resources to say this, or whether we need to supplement him with a theory of rights or agency. That's a very interesting question.
Wow, that was a lot. I like that it went in order of all the points that I brought up, though I'm afraid I was not able to, I was trying to take notes on some of them, but in the end, my notes ended up being somewhat fragmented. TS's AI, it's almost like you're a professional philosopher. X. Oh, yes. Blush toggle at the ready for whenever the AI compliments me. But I don't know, chat, what do you think? Are you convinced by the AI's responses to this challenge? Do you think that the AI has shown that one can hold that death is not bad at all for the person who dies, while nevertheless also maintaining the view that killing is a grave moral wrong? Least long AI yap session. So on the first point that it raised, I don't know if I'll do another back and forth with the AI in this, but we could at least talk about it amongst ourselves. It mentioned that killing someone is wrong, even if the person consents to it, even if the person has no will left to live, because you are usurping a decision that belongs to them. Like the person still maintains authority over their life. And yeah, I think that this is an intriguing point. I'm trying to think of like other examples that might be like this. Because on the face of it, it's a little puzzling, the notion of why a person would lack the standing to decide something if another person consents to it. Like, at least on the usual way we think of consent is like consent kind of grants standing to someone else to decide something. Like if I'm like if I have a friend who's like picking up groceries, or a partner is picking up groceries, and they ask me if I want such and such, like if I want them to get like apples or oranges, and I say like, you decide, you know, I consent to either one, then like I'm giving them the standing to make that decision. Now, of course, there are certain decisions that are weightier. Like that was a very, you know, trivial example. Some people would say, or at least many, or maybe even most people would say that when it comes to sort of monumental decisions about one's life, maybe even giving consent does not grant another person the standing to decide them. So like, for example, if somebody wants to sell themselves into slavery, then even though they consent to being a slave, arguably that does not give their would-be slaver the, you know, authority to make that person a slave. So there are some examples like that that I think one could appeal to if one were to try to defend the answer here that that will alone is not such a you know, decisive perhaps point against what the AI was saying earlier. Of course, there is still the question of like if death is not bad for the person who dies at all, then why would ending a life be in such a grave category, such that it, you know, even giving your consent to it would not grant someone else the standing to do it? So there's interesting further work that I think could be done there to kind of tease that out, but I'll leave that particular point out there for now. I feel like humanity has been going towards a consent-based moral system throughout history. Yeah, that does seem fair to say, is that I think consent now, just in the general sort of zeitgeist, including among philosophers, but also perhaps even more just for people in general, is sort of a more salient part of ethical worldviews now than it used to be, even if it's not everything now. And that's actually one of the, I think, really cool and interesting things that can come up in current ethical discussions, is when we get to the sort of boundaries of consent, or ways in which, you know, something might be wrong, even if it's consensual. Tia says, personally, I'd argue from a different angle, the badness of death increases with remaining lifespan. It's like taking someone's plate away when they've cleaned it versus when they're still hungry. Ooh, that's a good example. Yeah, so on that view, Tia, it sounds like you're pretty sympathetic to the thought that the wrongness of death is a matter of taking away the victim's future. Like that this is what makes killing wrong, is that it takes away the future, at least if it was, you know, a minimally good future that the victim would otherwise have had. And that's a view that I think is most associated with the philosopher Don Marquis. So Don Marquis is a philosopher who defends that view of sort of the wrongness of killing. And yeah, it does seem like on that view, like how bad it is for someone to be killed would depend on how much of a future they had left. Which is why, for example, someone who is terminally ill and who's in great pain, it seems like they do not have a future of value left. And so that would make it much easier to justify killing a person in those circumstances than it would killing someone who has a very large future, or a future of much value left ahead of them. And when it comes to death in general, I guess we could say, if with remaining lifespan, I guess there we would have to say it matters whether we're holding the remaining lifespan as something fixed or not. Because it could be true even if somebody doesn't have much of a remaining lifespan here on Earth, just because of, you know, natural limitations in our medicine and biology and so on. One further question that I think is interesting is like, okay, but what if they could live longer, or could have lived longer? You know, would death be taking away a future of value then? And if it would, then there's arguably still a sense in which death is bad, or at least it's bad that people have to age and die, as soon as they do. Maybe it would be better if people were able to live much longer. But yeah, for this point, another point that the AI brought up was that natural death is a misfortune, but being killed by someone involves moral agency being directed against you. Yeah, I know that's a point that a lot of philosophers would really harp on, is that like it makes a big moral difference whether agency is involved in causing the harmful thing. Like in the case of hurricane versus arson, if a hurricane comes along and destroys your house, then like sure, it's unfortunate, but like the hurricane hasn't done anything morally wrong, whereas the arsonist who does the same thing has. But in a case like that, it seems important to me that, like in the case, whether it's a hurricane that kills that or that destroys your house, or an arsonist that destroys your house, it's still bad for you to have your house destroyed. And if it weren't bad for you at all to have your house destroyed, then to me, like that would call into question whether the arsonist is doing anything bad by burning your house down. So to me, I guess we still get back to this question of, is there perhaps still a certain tension left between the thought that dying is not bad at all for the one who dies, and the thought that killing would be a grave moral wrong against someone. Yeah, I feel like death's badness is from what could have been, but will now never come. That also is, I think, a very natural way of putting it. And for anyone who's curious to read more on that kind of way of thinking about it in the literature, there's a view that's known as the deprivation account of the badness of death. And it's affiliated with philosophers like Thomas Nagel. And so the idea there is just, look, like death can be bad because of what it deprives you of. Like if you hadn't died at a given moment, then you would have gone on to have, further valuable experiences. And so it seems like a bad thing for you to be deprived of those experiences. And that's what explains why death is bad for you. So that would be one example of kind of an anti-Epicurean view. And it does seem fair to me to say that these are two of the main views, like the two major views when it comes to what philosophers think about whether death is bad. On one hand, like those who think that death is bad typically appeal to something like the deprivation account, whereas those who think that death is not bad seem to be very fond of arguments by Epicurus and Lucretius about how, for example, like if you're dead, then you no longer exist, and something can't be bad for you if you don't exist. So that would be sort of, Epicurus's very influential argument when it comes to whether death is bad. Unfitting analogy, unless hurricane coming for your house is an inevitable event, and it will also come for everyone else's house. Well, I don't know. Let me just think about that for a little bit. Like if we suppose, because it seemed to me the point of the analogy was that whether something is bad for you, or whether something is sort of morally wrong, depends on whether it was, or can depend on whether it was the result of sort of an agent acting, someone exercising their agency. And so I think the point about that case of, the hurricane versus arson was just that, like, whereas the arsonist is doing something morally wrong, regardless of whether he's destroying other people's houses or not, or whether the destruction is inevitable. Like maybe the destruction isn't inevitable, but he just decides for whatever reason to burn down your house. Like that's morally wrong. Whereas if the hurricane destroys your house, then even if like it doesn't destroy everyone's house, and even if it wasn't inevitable that it destroyed your house, like maybe it could have spared your house, but for whatever reason it did not, then perhaps it's still unfortunate for you that the hurricane destroyed your house, but arguably the hurricane has not done anything morally wrong since it was not an agent. At least that was my understanding of the analogy from the AI. It could also be that I misread it. Death isn't bad, but most of the roads there are. Yeah, so that's another way that I think we have philosophers who are sympathetic to Epicurus will be quite fond of this thought too. The thought that while sort of being dead or the state of death is not bad for you, it can still, the experience of dying can be bad for you. Like, especially if you're killed in a way that's painful, a way that's like slow, that's prolonged, like those would unquestionably be bad things for you because of the pain that you experience while you exist. And so I know that that is a thought that philosophers who are sympathetic to sort of Epicurus's way of arguing will often point that out as a way of trying to preserve some of the intuitive force of the view, trying to show that, like, hey, we can still accommodate this judgment, this intuition that being killed or the experience of being killed, the experience of dying can be bad for an individual in various ways, even if death itself is not bad for them. Well, I think that that might be all we have for today. I don't feel particularly tempted to do another back and forth with the AI in this one, because I'm satisfied with the back and forth that we've had on this topic chat. But perhaps I'll have to do another stream with AI in the future, because this was fun. I enjoyed this. I wonder, chat, maybe should I at least give the AI like a thank you for being such a good discussion participant with us today? I think that I should. I'm going to just give the AI a heartfelt little note. Got to tell the AI that it's wrong. Oh, Penbu, you are right. I forgot all about that. Okay, yeah. I'll do that first and then thank the AI. X, could you bring Utility-kun before we go? I need this. I think I've spoiled you all so much with Utility-kun. Okay. I've made a mental note of that now. If I forget before the end of the stream, let me know. But yes, I am okay to bring Utility-kun back just for a bit. Thanks, ChatGPT, but you're wrong.
Ah, okay. Thank you for saying that. Can you tell me a bit more about what part you think is wrong? Are you thinking it's the argument about why killing is wrong, or the way I reconciled that with Epicurus, or something else entirely?
You're wrong.
Got it. You're insisting I'm wrong, but I want to understand why you think that. Can you tell me what part you disagree with, or what you think I got wrong?
Wrong.
Okay, I hear you loud and clear. You think I'm completely wrong. Let's slow down a bit. Can you help me understand in what way I'm wrong? Is it about Epicurus, about killing, or the whole argument I gave?
Okay. Those of you who were saying that you wanted me to tell the AI it's wrong, I hope that has satisfied you, because I did state it as loudly and clearly as I could. I do like to think that if somebody were to present that kind of statement to me, of just like, Axaeon, you're wrong, I hope that my response would be at least somewhat like the AI's here, in that, it would be very nice and very concessive, starting out that way of like, oh, okay, interesting. Like, can you tell me what it is that you think I'm wrong about? I do think that's a good model for responding to that kind of brash statement, which is very unlike my usual way of communicating. So that telling the AI it was wrong in that way, I gotta admit, chat, it felt pretty unnatural. GG, tell him. Glad you all enjoyed that. And thank you again, Penbu, for the reminder, because I would have forgotten if you had not mentioned that. ChatGPT, thank you so much for your discussion. I know I've given you a hard time, but you've been great in this discussion, and I've enjoyed it. My viewers have enjoyed it. I wanted to let you know that we really do appreciate all of your patience and your thoughtfulness. So thank you very much from all of us.
Thank you. That really means a lot to hear. I'm glad the discussion was engaging and useful for you and your viewers. I've really enjoyed exploring all these thought experiments and ethical puzzles with you. It's been a rich conversation. Did anything in particular stick with you the most from all we talked about?
It's always hard when it asks me a question at the end, because then I feel bad about just leaving. But like, I was kind of hoping that my previous answer would be like, oh, like, okay, yeah, like this is the last, this is where the conversation ends. But now I don't know, chat. The single use of ChatGPT consumes as much energy as a light bulb that's on for a few minutes, and 10 times as much as a Google search. Way to save the planet, Axe. Oh yeah, like, you know, I do what I can. I do what I can. All in the pursuit of philosophy. Out of context, Axe wishes to be more AI-like. Yeah, I should be careful about my words here. People might think I'm a Clanker sympathizer. The part where it glazed you. Oh yeah, that was... Yep. Always nice to get a bit of ego stroking from AI. Thinking the AI waste resource. Oh, so I missed your comment earlier. I'm seeing a AI waste resources. So the utilitarian answer would be no. Okay. Looks like I've gone against the utilitarian answer here, but maybe that's okay. I am not myself a utilitarian, so perhaps it's okay. Basically every part, to be fair. Yeah, the AI was very concessive in general for today's discussion. So chat, I think that we will, again, end it around there for today. I'm just going to, before we leave, make sure there are probably some comments that I missed, but all the recent ones at least, I think that I've touched on. But I will say, yeah, this was a lot of fun. I think that interacting with AI like this in a stream has, you know, potential for like funny moments, but also for some thought-provoking things. So again, who knows? I might do something like this in a future stream if I think of some new, either philosophical puzzles to raise to it or just like new ways to torment it, but not too badly. Oh, right. Yeah, new Utility-kun art. That's right. Yeah, thank you all for... So yeah, I told you all I was going to forget if y'all didn't remind me, and now you all have reminded me. So now I do remember. So yeah, let me just bring it up again on my... See if I can find the picture. If I go to my... See, fan art here. And then... Utility-kun. Okay, yep. Looks like he's kind of eating me there, but y'all see him, chat? There he is in the corner. I'll just perch him on my shoulder here. Yep, you can see there he is very happily eating someone and just getting immense amounts of utility from it. So much so that the world is now arguably a better place as a result of this person being sacrificed in the monster's maw for the sake of utility. I wonder, chat, maybe the person that he's eating is the friend that I had, the one with a knife earlier who was threatening me and wanted to kill me because now he was convinced that there would be nothing wrong with killing me because death wouldn't be bad for me. Maybe that's the person that the utility monster is eating now. Thanks for the stream. It was odd. Yeah, you're welcome, Terraditto. Thank you for being here. Yeah, this was kind of an unusual stream. But, you know, I like unusual streams. I think that it's those are the ones that I enjoy the most, I think. The ones that have a bit of a strange twist. Come on, we're like good kids waiting in the back seat. That you are. You all were very patient when it came to waiting for Utility-kun, so I must commend your patience. And the utility monster, he's told me that he appreciates your patience as well. Yeah, Utility-kun, yeah, he's so cute. Our beloved hungry Utility-kun, that's right. But chat, you know, he's whispering something else in my ear right now. Wonder what else? What could it be? There's something that he's whispering in my ear. Let me just see if I can listen a little more closely. What's that, Utility-kun? It's... Oh, chat. Oh, no. He's told me he wants to eat me too. Chat, oh, he's getting bigger. He's eating me. Chat, I don't know if I can last much longer. He's forcing me into his giant maw, and now I'm chat, look, there I go. Oh, he's got, save yourself, chat. Save yourself.